Good evening and welcome to Gap Perspective with Haley and Janet. Hi, Haley. How are you today?
Hi, Janet. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good and I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. This is so special that she agreed to do this, and we're very honored to have her. Her name is Ana Grullon, and she is a licensed clinical social worker in both the state of New Jersey and Texas. She has so many degrees and honors. She not only has one master's degree, she has two in the community health from University of Oslo. In terms of clinical training, she has worked in various settings: hospitals, nonprofits, insurance companies, medical practices, and even her own private practice. She's a parent juggling her world like the rest of us with your employment, with your children, and with your career. She has been in the field for over 10 years and has provided services to both English and Spanish speaking clients with the focus on utilizing a trauma informed lens. Anna started her career in mental health, working with children and families in foster care, advocating for them in family court. She has provided therapeutic services for survivors of domestic violence and has led presentations on healthy relationships in school settings. We are so honored to have her. She now has her focus on her private practice. Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you both for having me. I'm so excited to be talking to you all about such an important topic.
Yes, this month is, as you know, Mental Health Awareness Month, and we hold a special place for that in our hearts for all people that are suffering from any kind of mental illness, anxiety, depression, PTSD, and I'm sure there's a million others that you can name, Anna. And Haley, I will turn it over to you so you may start the interview with our licensed clinical social worker, Anna.
Thank you so much for coming on Gap Perspective. I'm so excited.
Thank you for having me, Haley. So am I.
How do you define trauma-informed care in your practice?
Trauma informed care is an approach that therapists take to validate a person's entire life experience. So, trying to understand their past and present and how that has affected their relationships, their mental health, their day to day life. When you have a trauma informed approach in therapy, you want to make sure that you are kind and gentle with your clients and your patients, depending on the setting. You can call them clients or patients, trying to approach your work with them with a concept called unconditional positive regard. That's one of the biggest things for me with my trauma informed work. I show up and connect with people, and they're the experts in their own story. So I may have training and clinical background and experience in treating mental health, but it's really a collaboration with me and the other person because they're the experts in their experiences. And so helping them to feel safe, not judging them, making sure that they're able to eventually trust me and talk about difficult things that they might have gone through that might have hurt them physically or emotionally. Recognizing symptoms of trauma. So being able to tell if there are emotional, physical, cognitive, behavioral symptoms that a person is showing, integrating knowledge about trauma into policies and procedures and within your own practice, actively avoiding re-traumatization. But for me, the most important part is approaching the work that I do with somebody as gently and respectfully as possible.
How do you help clients understand the connection between their past experiences and their present challenges?
So therapists receive different types of training. I was trained to meet my clients where they're at. One of the first things I do is ask if they've been in therapy before and if they prefer for the sessions to be led by them or led by me. Some people want to show up and chat with me for 45 minutes about whatever's on their mind, and that's where we go. Some people show up and want more structure and want me to ask them more questions or start from when they're little to when they're adults. But for helping them understand what they've been through and how that could have affected them, they have to be ready to discuss that. So I don't ever push or pry, even though I do an intake and have an understanding of their past traumas, until they bring that up. I don't go there. That's one of the most important things in my practice and in my own work is that it's really when they're ready. And then when they're ready, I'm usually able to help provide, some context in terms of research or studies or things like that to help normalize what they've been through and what they might be experiencing after that.
Okay. And
I'm sure.
how do you approach working with potential triggers and flashbacks?
It's a really good question. So again, making sure to meet them where they're at. I'm not going to be insensitive and ask about things that they're not ready to discuss. When I started my own mental health journey in college and I started therapy, I sat in a therapist's office for a year talking, but not really being ready to go there. It can take a long time before somebody feels comfortable enough to open up about things and get feedback from somebody about really hard things that they've been through. But once they're there, if they're ready to talk about it and we're having a session and they are triggered or they are having flashbacks, at that point in our work, usually we've had enough of a foundation in terms of coping skills and practicing them that we can start to employ them. One of the most important things I always tell everybody is we have to figure out what makes you feel better. Music is a coping skill for me. Art is not a coping skill for me, but it is for many of my patients. I wish I could draw beautifully. I can't even draw sick people well, but I go to music, I go to songs. What I tell them is we have to be able to practice your coping skills when you're okay, when you're not triggered. So your body and brain can start going to it as muscle memory when you are upset. So whether that's writing in a journal for 2 minutes or going for a 10-minute walk, listening to a song, watching a movie, we try to practice those things outside of our session. If we are in a session and we are triggered, we can go to them more easily. If somebody's having a panic attack, it's incredibly difficult to break through and get somebody to calm down because their brain thinks that they're in such real danger and are really scared, even if they're not in any physical sense of danger. If we say, okay, we're about to have a panic attack, let's go back to what we know. Let's practice deep breathing, or let's turn on a candle that makes you feel better because of the smell. I go through the 5 senses a lot. Let's look at 5 things we can see in this room, 4 things that are the color red, 3 things that you can touch. If we do those and they've already practiced them in the past, it's a lot easier to go to them automatically and you kind of break through a bit easier.
Yes, I 100% agree with that because with my own therapy sessions, that's also what they recommend when I'm having a panic attack or a really bad day. And truthfully, it actually works.
I mean, if you practice it enough, like tying shoes or learning how to ride a bike, the muscle memory takes over and you just are able to do it. You don't even have to think about it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Myself, when I was having anxiety driving, I started to listen to books on tape in the car, and that made
Mhm.
me focus on the story instead of being afraid of whatever it was I was afraid of. It does definitely help to switch. But like you said, as a professional, it's hard to get someone out of that mode to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist. You are. I'm sure that that's a very hard thing for you to do.
The most important part of our work is listening and being able to sit with somebody during the hard stuff. I do have to make sure that I am providing support and comfort and research if it helps normalize the situation. Being able to sit with somebody and bear witness to something they've lived through in the past that they're processing now is a privilege. It does get hard. I have to take my own time after sessions to hold that space for them and process it for myself. I don't like to hear that when you were little, somebody hurt you, or that you went through a really traumatic medical procedure that still has repercussions in your life today. It doesn't make me feel good to know that you've suffered, but it does make me feel confident that I can hear that hard stuff and support you through it.
And how does that affect your mental health? Hearing all of the stories that you have to hear about domestic violence, about PTSD, about all the issues that you hear. How do you deal with that in your own personal space?
That's a great question. Before doing this work full time, I remember I used to love watching shows like Law and Order SVU. And I was okay hearing stories about animal abuse in the news. Right. When I'm in sessions, it's what we were talking about before, like the muscle memory. I don't go there. I don't get triggered or upset in my sessions. You can tell me any single thing and it won't be shocking. It'll just be a supportive response for me, and that's automatic. But afterwards, I do need to take time, because knowing what other people have been through and the pain that some of their close family members have caused them, sometimes children with parents who were abusive, it's a lot to know that there are people out in the world who are really struggling and who might not have the resources and the support to connect with a therapist. It's expensive to get therapy, and you need medical insurance to have it. And then you need to find the right fit for a therapist. So I avoid things that make me feel bad outside of session. I no longer watch Law and Order SVU, even though it was one of my favorite shows. I honestly cannot hear about abuse stories, things like that outside of my work. So I protect my own peace and I watch happy shows so that I can make sure that when I show up for session, I can bear witness to the hard stuff that's happening in real life with my patients.
That's good. That's good that you have an outlet. I remember, you might know this, The Sopranos, the show Sopranos.
Yeah.
Do you remember the therapist? She used to go to, but
Yeah.
she was a psychiatrist, right? Yes. She used to go to her friend, the psychiatrist. I thought maybe that you had an outlet like that, that you go and you speak to someone.
So I do have both my own therapist and also supervision helps. Even though I'm an LCSW, I legally don't need to be supervised anymore. But I think it's incredibly important to have other friends who are therapists and then have like an actual clinical supervision group that I go to as needed. It's hard to find the right fit for a therapist. And so right now I don't currently have a therapist because I haven't found the person that 'cause I always say that going to therapy is like getting a tune-up with your car. You don't have to be in it for 10 years consecutively, but every so often you might want to go back for something else. And so right now, I don't have my own therapist,
Okay.
but it's important to have one. I need one.
If there's any therapists out there, please put your help out. Hopefully you are. I have a question, Haley, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, therapist, you're a clinical social worker, correct? Okay. You are not legally bound to disclose information. If I told you that I murdered somebody and they came to you, the authorities, and said, did Janet murder somebody? You are legally bound to disclose that, where a therapist is not legally bound
So
to disclose that. Am I correct?
if you're calling yourself a therapist, legally, you should have a license like I do, and you are going to have confidentiality with your patients. We talked earlier about how to create a safe space for patients and how to do something that's trauma informed. Part of that is also going over confidentiality and its limits. I always tell people it depends on the state, right? I'm licensed in New Jersey, I'm licensed in Texas. Each state has its own board of social work examiners. And each person who can call themselves a therapist, which is not only a social worker, but also a psychologist or a licensed clinical counselor or a marriage and family therapist. We all have our own licenses and our own boards and our own code of ethics. So I'm going to speak about my own board specifically
Okay.
because it might vary. I will keep every single thing you tell me confidential, except for a few rules. If you tell me that you are thinking of murdering someone, I will have to disclose that to the authorities. And there's an appropriate way to do that, right? I'm not going to just call them and blurt it out. If you tell me that a child who's a minor or an elderly person is being abused, I may have to disclose that as well. I try to always have the conversation with my clients that I may need to make a phone call to Adult Protective Services or the right authorities so that they're not caught by surprise.
Okay. That was a good answer. Thank you. Haley, you can continue.
So another thought I have for you is, what types of trauma do you have the most experience working with?
That is a great question. So I really focused on working with different types of trauma survivors, specifically a lot with people who had survived domestic violence, sexual assault, people who have experienced medical traumas or traumas around being a caregiver to somebody with medical issues. I feel like it's also shifting now that I'm a mom. So before I had kids and before I was married, I did a lot of work with kids in foster care. And now that I am a parent myself, I've actually started to transition to working with parents, more specifically with women, because everybody's life looks different. But if you are a woman and you are married and you have children, whether or not you're a single parent, that's a different situation. But whether or not you have a great supportive spouse, it feels like there isn't a 50-50 balance in terms of what you're responsible for as the mom and what your partner is responsible for as your co-parent and spouse. I have been working a lot with moms who are dealing with working full-time jobs outside of the home, doing the bulk of the childcare and the bulk of the household work. Especially in the US, it didn't always look like this for us. Back a couple decades ago, women didn't really work outside the home, and the economy looked different so that you could own a home and live with the income from one person.
It's definitely changed.
Yeah, but now you need two incomes to survive. And the person who was at home cooking and cleaning and doing the caregiving for the kids is outside of the home working and then coming home to do all that.
It's true. That's what I think women wanted. I'm against women's liberation or anything, but it's true. I think we gave ourselves more work. We really didn't get the same pay. We didn't
No.
get the same benefits. Now, like you said, we have to go home. We have to cook. We have to do the kids' homework. We have to do everything with the kid. Then we have to go to work the next day, come home and repeat. Like,
Yeah.
thank God for people like you that can keep some of the women balanced in their minds so that they don't lose it, you know?
And,
Lose that.
every country has its pros and cons. There are some really wonderful things in the US, but I think for this particular topic, there's a lot that we can learn from other nations where they've kind of figured it out a little bit better than us. If you live in France, you can take up to 3 years of maternity leave, and your job will be waiting for you when you come back. I had my baby in Norway because I was
Oh,
living there at the
nice.
time. They give you a box full of things you need for your child in that first year of life. When you give birth, it's free. There's no cost to you. There's something called a baby hotel. So when you give birth, you go and stay in another wing of the hospital where you're seen by midwives and nurses for a few days until you're ready to go home. Birth takes a lot out of you. My partner got up to a year of paid paternity leave when we had our baby.
Wow, that's fabulous. Do you have to be a citizen of Norway?
No,
Be
we were
visiting.
not citizens. It's actually difficult to get citizenship in many European countries. My husband was working for the Norwegian Weather Service at the time. So we were there on a visa.
Nice.
And with
That's
that
great.
visa, you were able to access healthcare and education and everything like that.
So your child is a Norwegian resident also?
She's not. So the
What?
US is one of the few countries where you have something called jus solis. So if you're born on American soil, you are an American. But in most other countries, that's not actually the case. If you're born in Norway, if you have a parent with Norwegian citizenship or Norwegian blood, as they call it, then you become a citizen. If not, you have to wait until you're 18. You have to take a test. You have to do all the things.
I think there's going to change it here now. I've been hearing scuttlebutt about that.
Yeah, they
I
might.
think it's supposed to change it.
So she's a US citizen because she was born abroad, but she went to a US consulate and got her paperwork there.
Another thought I have for you is, how do you stay updated on the latest research and best practices in trauma-informed care?
So there's a couple of ways that I try to prioritize. I do have ADHD, so my brain sometimes hyperfocuses on certain things. The first one is I'm connected to a few therapist communities that I make sure I connect with and read through. The other one is the NASW, the National Association for Social Workers. They're a really good resource. For our licenses, we have to do continuing education credits every so often, depending on which state. So in Texas and New Jersey, it's actually the same thing. It's every 2 years. You have to provide a certain number of community education credits to make sure that you're up to date on all the research. And for me, like I said, with ADHD, I just get excited about a topic and I'll start to, dedicate time into it. So right now I've been really into like ecotherapy and what it means for people with mental health issues when they're outside in nature and how that affects their brain. Taking little bits of time out to research or my CEUs, things like that.
Okay, that's interesting. And what did a typical therapy session with you look like?
So for me, the best practice is to have a therapy session be 45 minutes. But I always like to ask my clients how they're feeling that day and what they're thinking they might want to do. We can go as short as 30 minutes or up to 60 minutes, depending on what's going on. I always like to check in to see how they're feeling about the time, because if you're a busy mom and your kid was up all night the night before and you have a session, you might not want to talk to me for 60 minutes. You might want to do something briefer for 30 and then get some time back. After that, I try to ask how things have been since the last time we connected. And usually my clients will take the lead with what they want to talk about. If I've previously given them homework or resources, I might check in for a minute or two about that and see how it was for them. When we have about 10 minutes of session left, I let them know we're winding down so they're not caught off guard. My last few minutes are for homework and resources if they're getting any. Some people really like homework, some people don't. I don't like homework when I go to my own therapy. It's not beneficial to me. And then the last thing I like to do is try to make sure I summarize what we talked about, but with a positive reinforcement. So if a client has shown up and has talked about experiencing domestic violence in their home and having an incident happen that week before, we focus on that. But I do try to end with just making sure that they know that they're loved and that they're safe and that I see them and that they don't deserve to be treated that way and that there is a way forward. So ending on a positive note, if it's appropriate.
Yes, yes. I had a question for you. It's not related to that. Are you finished or you're still going with your questions?
I just had about two more.
Okay. And then I'll ask her mine after you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Following up on that same topic, with your clients or patients, do you normally recommend self-help tools like journaling, reading novels, books, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked earlier about coping skills, and I always tell my clients, you shouldn't need me forever. You might need to go back to therapy and you might want to come back to me or to somebody else. but you should have periods where you feel independent and confident enough to be on your own. When you feel ready for that, I want you to have a toolbox of things that help you feel good and also help you feel better when you're feeling down. And so, absolutely, self help books, anything that makes them feel better or that helps them process what they're going through or what they want to process, I think is always beneficial.
That's great. Have you ever recommended the 5-minute journal?
I don't think I've heard of the 5-minute journal. Can you tell me more about it?
So the 5-minute journal, it's like a gratitude intention setting journal with morning and evening prompts.
I have not recommended it because I didn't know about it, but I'm going to look it up. It sounds like it could be really helpful.
Yes, it has definitely helped me as well. The book in the beginning goes through different things like daily affirmations, morning routine, night routine, trying to get you more into things.
Yeah.
And it goes on to you completing the journal throughout a 6-month period. So we'll ask you 5 questions a day, like what is your daily affirmation today? What are you most grateful for? Definitely writing and things like that has helped me throughout my own therapy journey. And
Yeah.
then a second one is I don't know if you ever heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
That is one of the books I most recommend to people.
It's so good.
I'm glad that you know it. So let me tell you two things. Healing isn't isolated. In order for us to be okay, we need to be okay internally. Our community also feeds into that and either can make it worse or better. There are different things that are going to make you feel like you're healing. If something like a journal or a book is going to help in that, I think that's really powerful and really important. It's not going to be just therapy sessions that get you to feel better again. And then the other thing is, you know, what I like so much about The Body Keeps a Score is that you, and I think the author is Dr. Bethel Vanderkolk. So a lot of people who go through hard things are not necessarily able to face that on their own. And it's easy to just ignore difficult feelings or kind of push them down. You know, I was raised by parents who, in their generation, that's how they were taught. Don't cry. So I was never allowed to feel my feelings, not because my parents didn't love me, but because they didn't know how to manage it themselves or for me. They weren't raised that way. And so what happens when you push that stuff down, you start to lose connection between how you actually feel and what's going on. So there are a lot of people, myself included, when I was younger, before I started therapy, that are always fine on the outside, but they're actually severely depressed or severely anxious or just not coping well with life. And if you don't acknowledge what's going on and you don't sit with the hard stuff and you just ignore it, you're going to get sick, whether it's mentally or physically or both. When The Body Keeps the Score, the author highlights the connection between mental and physical health and what happens when you aren't able to go through it. With hard stuff, you can't go past it. You have to go through it. So my job as a therapist is to hold space with you to be able to go through it because it's hard. It's not easy,
No.
but it's worth it.
And like you said, my generation, are you a millennial?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm
So we have
37.
a Gen Zer, a millennial, and a baby boomer. My generation, if you think they didn't say anything in yours as a millennial, mine, they didn't tell you anything. Even when a young girl goes home and says that she's menstruating, yeah, put this, go back to school. They didn't even tell you what was happening. You really had to figure everything out yourself. Maybe that's why we're so screwed up. I don't know. They didn't really tell you much. Talking about my own family, they didn't tell you much.
Yeah.
Just like you said, the mothers were home. It was a different vibe. If there was any kind of abuse going on or anything, you didn't talk about it. And God forbid, they would say to you, don't tell the street what's going on in our house. You keep that in the house. You don't put the dirty laundry outside. They would say that. Now everything seems to be more open, which that's a question I have for you too. Do you feel that the Gen Zers have more anxiety than the millennials or other groups? I feel that they seem to be more sensitive. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Well, we'll say sensitive, Haley.
I don't know that I know enough Gen Zers to answer that.
Oh,
I do think that the Gen Zers I've come across seem to have more emotional intelligence at their age than I had at mine. Maybe that portrays them to be more sensitive, but I think it's just that they have more self awareness than we did and are able to have that translate in terms of how they deal with other people and how they talk about certain topics. But also, the world we're handing them, they
right.
should be anxious. Like, there's a lot that we need to work on.
Scary. Yes, it's scary for them. I feel
Yeah.
terrible for my own sons too. I have a millennial, and I don't know what would my other son be. He's 45. What is that? I don't even know. But whatever that is, I feel sorry for both of them because they
Yeah.
struggle. The young people today really are struggling. If they didn't have parents to live with, I don't know what they would do. And they
Yeah.
really make good salaries, but it's very, very difficult.
So that's what I was telling my husband the other day. We've made in the last 2 years more money than we've ever made. We're still living paycheck to paycheck. How does
Yes,
that make any sense?
I know. It's horrible. But I have another question for you. I saw on your resume, and I used to be on a board called Hudson Cradle. It was a home for infants.
It sounds
And
familiar, but
yeah,
does that still exist?
no, it
I didn't
doesn't.
think
The
so.
state
Okay.
took away the funding. It was a home for infants that were abused, that were drug addicted, that were abandoned, and that was became their home.
Mhm.
So I saw that you had in your bio about infant mental health. You explain that because I think I understand it, but I'm not quite sure.
So people, when I talk about that, are always really confused. They're like, how do you provide mental health to a 2-month-old? I was really lucky when I started working at what was then the Einstein College of Medicine. It is now part of Montefiore in the Bronx. I worked with a psychologist, and she was a doctor, but she had everybody call her Ann. I think that was part of her approach to the work, is she didn't want people to feel like she was an expert and they weren't. So she taught me quite a lot. She was developing something called the Group Attachment Based Intervention, GABI, and it was providing infant mental health to dyads. So you have the infant and you have the parent. Usually it was the mom who was present with us in therapy. And really the focus of that is helping the infant regulate by helping the parent regulate. Being able to teach parents that what you do for your child, even when they're very, very little, even if they're not going to consciously remember it when they're older, will still leave an imprint in them and help them grow into whatever type of adult they're going to become. So if I have a really anxious mom who's always kind of hovering, I bet you that if that isn't worked on, their kid will end up being an anxious kid and then an anxious adult. And so it's helping the dyad, even though it's called infant mental health, it's really both the infant and the caregiver that we're supporting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to me. Thank you for explaining that. That was
Yep.
the question I had. And it does make sense because even, right, they say if you don't bond with the baby, then there's something like these babies that were born and just put into a crib,
Yeah.
or that they grow up with a different mindset.
Yeah. One of the most important things I've ever learned about as a therapist is something called attachment theory. When I talk to people about mental health, I try not to bring in too many big terms or like, oh, this research article from Columbia said, because I want everybody to get it. And if I'm using journals and fancy words, it might not be accessible to everyone. So I don't want to be elitist. But attachment theory is extremely important because in the first 3 years of life, the way that you attach to your caregivers, whoever they are, is going to influence your friendships, your romantic relationships, and your own sense of self forevermore. So if you were a baby that your parents just put you in your crib and let you cry it out and never picked you up, never held you. That's something like generational too, right? Like my aunt, when my baby was born, would tell me, "Oh, you're getting her too used to your arms. You got to just leave her there.
It's
She's going to
hard.
be too spoiled." And I had to explain to her, like, no, it's the opposite. For her to feel like she has a secure attachment to me and that she feels safe in the world, I need to give her all the comfort and safety physically that I can provide. If you have a child that's getting the opposite, where their needs aren't being met because their parents are ignoring them, that child could become anxiously attached or avoidantly attached growing up. A lot of people that come to me who are adults who have difficulties maintaining friendships or healthy romantic relationships have attachment stuff going on, and they just haven't really thought about it before.
And
We talked about the body keeps a score. We talked about the 5-minute gratitude journal. I think understanding what your attachment is, whether it's secure attachment, avoidant attachment, there's a few of them. What your attachment style is critical to help you better your relationships with people around you.
interesting. I think I'm going to make an appointment with you.
You're welcome to.
Haley, are you finished with your questions?
Yes, I wrapped up a little earlier.
Okay. So I think for the listeners, if you don't mind, if they wanted to contact you or come to your practice, would you mind giving the information?
Absolutely. So I do have a website.
We will list it also, right, Haley?
Yes, in the description of this episode, I will leave all your resources.
There we go. The website has everything that you need to contact me. And even if it's just a consult, I do 10-minute free consults to see if I can work with you, because there are some things that I don't specialize in. So I won't ever work with somebody if I don't have the tools to help them. I'm always happy to do a 10-minute free consult to see if we're the right fit or if you have any questions in general. And then we go from there.
Okay, so we will list it, but if you want to say it for the listeners, they might not read the...
So it's alma sana, which means like healthy soul. And I believe it's calm. Let me confirm that. I don't go to my own website too often. Let me see.
Some people don't read it, so maybe it's for the
Yeah,
listeners.
and they just voice their stuff, and then I also put it in text.
So it's
Oh,
www.almasanatherapy.com, and alma is ALMA and sana is SANA. So almasanatherapy.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
Great.
you guys. I really enjoyed talking to you both.
It was really a great interview, and we'd like to have you back again sometime.
Yeah, you let me know. I'm always
Yes.
happy to talk about specific things, supporting people through suicide ideation, which is also super important and a huge topic,
Right. Yeah.
or like safety assessments, what that looks like.
We have a lot of topics we could speak to. This
Great.
wasn't even long enough. We could keep going. Unfortunately, we have to end. Thank you again for coming. Haley?
Thank you so much. I thought our conversation was very informative, and I feel like our listeners will get a lot out of it. I'm slowly trying to break the stigma around mental health, so thank you for helping me throughout that journey as well.
Thank you both for having this podcast and talking about this such important topic. I appreciate you both.
Thank
To
you.
our listeners for listening
Yes.
to this episode of Gap Perspective with Haley and Janet. Take care.
Hands up my anxiety. It's so hard at times, I feel like I can't breathe. Oh, I think I've overcome it lately, but every time something knocks